Hello and welcome to Play the Game,
your friendly neighborhood podcast.
We hope you're enjoying the new format.
And we've got some new features and surprises along the way.
But for now, we're going to try to bring the same quality segments we've been bringing you for the last few months.
All here on Play the Game.
In this episode, we'll be bringing you tips and tricks on how to bring your minis to life with John and Small Jobs.
We're going to talk to some gaming professionals about the future of gaming.
Marty's going to bring out his mad scientist and his take on Mwahahaha.
And Dave's going to take us to the edge with his review of Panic Station.
One of the most interesting crossing points are video gamers who are being introduced to board games. And I've had interviewer after blogger, after website, individual magazine stopping by to say, hey, we're starting to cover board games. We're starting to cover board games. And consistently, what they realize is this is just a medium. This is a medium for an experience. And whether it's digital or it's analog and it's tangible, these are tools that individuals will share some experience. So I think what's happening, yes, it absolutely will, it'll grow.
I think gamers like being challenged, and I think gamers like innovation, really. And one of the things that has gotten a lot of gamers, in addition to what I was talking about, is that it's a card-based mechanic that really was never involved. So it is something new. We're carrying that through to Puppet Wars, which is our other new game, and we're sort of carrying that through a lot of stuff because it is something new. It's something that's not in a dozen other games, just sort of done slightly differently. So yeah, I mean, it's really sort of challenging gamers, making them think new ways.
Seeing games start moving toward being more of a media where it's not, oh, this is just for entertainment. Like at one point, movies are just for entertainment, but then you can have a movie that really teaches you about the world, the human condition and stuff. And I think that's kind of the next step we're going to see games take.
I still think that there's a sense of community. There's something about getting together with your buddies, beer and pretzels, play a game, and there's a social aspect to it. So I think that's always here to stay.
Alert, station is now on code red. Alert, station is now on code red. Alert, station is now on code red.
All right, so this time we're going to be taking a look at David Oslo's Panic Station from Stronghold Games. This game falls into one of those genres that's the paranoia game where you're not really sure if one of the players is out to get you, because in this case they actually are. The setup of this game is you're going into this facility and there's an infestation going on, and it's your job to actually take out the alien infestation. But the problem is that one of you is going to become infected. And that's the guy who's going to be trying to take out the rest of the human team. So the basic setup of the game is you and your android are a team. And you are going to be dropped into this facility to try and hunt down and kill the alien infestation. And all the other players have an android and a human player as well. The characters do have slightly different capabilities. In this case, the human is the only one, or a human is the only one that can actually destroy the nest. The android is there to protect the human. So the android wields weapons and does most of the damage. The game is controlled through action points. So your team starts the game itself with 4 total action points. And those are indicated by these little hand icons in the upper corners of your characters. You'll also note that there's this nice little set of hearts at the top, and that's your health. Each character starts with 4 health. Now your action points can be used however you choose. If you want to use all 4 of your action points on only one character, that's fine. So that character could do 4 actions. And actions are things like moving from place to place, opening doors, doing searches, that kind of thing. The drawback with using these action points is as you get wounded, you lose them. And in this case, after you go down to 2 action points, or 2 hearts I should say, 2 health, you get 1 action point on this. So now you only have a total of 3. So of course you want to keep your characters as healthy as possible. And there's ways that you can heal throughout the game and get those points back. The true key to the mechanics of the game is how you set it up initially. This can't be stressed enough. You have to seed the deck correctly to get the play to work the way it's supposed to. In the case of this setup, we have a 4-player game. So within the first 8 cards, it's the number of players times 2, you will have seeded the infection card or host card. The player that draws this, that's the guy. That's the guy who's going to be trying to get the rest of you to be infected, and hopefully win the game. The rest of you are going to be truly paranoid about who is going to be the host while maintaining your team and trying to get to the nest to kill it. The nest can only be killed with fire. So one of the key components of the game is gas. And gas comes in the form of these little gas cans and can be used for two things. One, an infected player is going to try and infect you, bar none. That's their entire job throughout the game. The only way that you can stop an infection is with this gas can. So you might want to keep one of these in your hand just in case you feel that the guy coming into the room with you is going to try and infect you. And that's how the infestation works. As soon as one human player enters the room with another human player, they must exchange one card from their hand. So when you originally set up your hand, you're going to be given one gas can, a random search card, and these three cards right here. These are your personal infection cards. So if you happen to, in the first round of play or first rounds of play, become the host, when you enter that room, you're probably going to try and slip that player one of these infection cards so that he is then infected. The only way that they can defend is through the use of a gas card. These cards are played face down, so you don't really know what you're exchanging at that point. When I played the game the first time around, I got infected early on, and one of my ploys was, originally I would not try and infect a player. If I entered the room, I'd give him an item card. So the next time I entered the room, he thought I was safe. I infected him. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're playing the game. How are you going to actually strategically try and get these people to trade the cards and be infected? Now, there is one caveat. When another player enters, or another human player enters that room, they don't necessarily have to trade a card if they decide to attack you. But that in itself is a little bit weird because now everybody's a little more paranoid. Maybe he's the infected guy and he's just trying to kill the guy. You never know. So that's a lot of fun too. It is a strategy. The game itself is built through exploration, the actual game board itself. So one of your actions would be spent on exploring if you wanted to, and you would draw a map card or a location card. And you would place these in the orientations that they work the best for you if you're doing the search. And there's some icons in here that indicate different ways that you can utilize the cards in different forms. Like there's some free passes, so you don't use an actual action point to move from one point to another because you got a little free pass here with this type of card. There's some that are specializing in searches, so you can search and another player can get some extra cards as well. As the game goes on and you get different locations, you can get to a computer area which is going to allow you to do a lot of different things. And one of them is you can actually scan for body heat. And that's one of the ways that you can tell who's infected and who's not, is through these scans. There's also a scanner card so you can do personal scans as well, but I think there's only a couple of them in here. The way that works is if you did want to do a scan or you had the capability to do a scan, these two cards are sitting on the side of your play area and they indicate whether you're hot, feverish, or not. Regular human. Infected, not infected. So when somebody scans, you would place a card in the appropriate area, whether you're infected or not, and then it's all done face down, so nobody really knows. And then the cards are tallied and flipped up, and as they're gone through, if there's a couple of infections in there, now everybody is twice as paranoid, and that's awesome. That happened a couple times during our game, and really enjoyed it. So the game itself moves relatively quickly. And as you're going through, you're going to be acquiring items, and you're going to be acquiring maybe bulletproof vests to protect your guys. And that's one of the things that's really nice, and that's another limiting factor of the game, is the fact that these items kind of control the gameplay as well. Because since your android is the only one that can actually fire, or I should say use a projectile weapon, in this case of a gun or a machine gun, they also have to have bullets to do it. So even though you may have that, you may not be able to actually perform the action because you don't have the ammunition. And that also has a limiting factor using that little rotatey mechanic as well. So this card is actually only 4 shots. So you got to keep in mind that you only have 4 shots, and then you got to find another stack of bullets. When you encounter aliens, the aliens the turns work in 2 phases. There's the alien phase or the infection phase, in which case a die is rolled and all of these little guys that are on the board move in a specific direction, and the team phase. So as these aliens pop up, they're going to be placed on the board according to what the die roll is. And when they first show up, they're actually pretty weak. Like it's really only 1 damage to take care of one. But as more and more of them come out, they're going to get harder and harder to kill to a maximum of 2 damage. So it would take 2 shots of a weapon or 2 hits from some kind of item or whatever. It's twice as hard to kill the later aliens as it is the ones in the beginning. And as characters also get more infected, or more characters get infected, that's the entire team trying to work against you. So once the infection starts, it's very, very, very hard for the human players to actually win the game. So it's really challenging at points. Everything else in the game is it's packaged very nicely. The cards are great. The art is great. It really gives you a sense of foreboding because the lighting on the cards themselves is kind of mysterious looking. So I really like the game, and I definitely think you should go out and try it. And here's John with Small Jobs.
Welcome back to Small Jobs. Last time we worked on painting the face of this warrior sorceress, and today we're going to work on highlighting and shading. Since last time, I've decided to improve on a couple of things. For one, her base was a little small, so I've increased the size of her base, added a little few stones and rocks to give it some character, and I've also gone ahead and purchased a new bottle of the Scurvy Green because it was a little thin, wasn't going down very well, and as you can see, I gave it a nice good solid coat, so it's a nice even color. And kind of a little trick was I also hit it with a coat or 2 of the Tester's lusterless lacquer, and that allows me to kind of cheat by saving my work. It puts a nice quick coat on there, seals in the paint, and if I am painting on top of that, if I screw up at all, I can use a wet brush to kind of wick away some of the mistakes. You don't have to do this, but it's kind of a nice little cheat, a way to kind of save your work. So let's get started on the colors here. I think we're going to start with her skin tone. Again, we're using the theory of working inside to outside. Last time we used the Caucasian flesh. And we're going to kind of do the same thing we did for her face. So I'm actually going to start with another flesh wash just to kind of pick out the details. So again, the flesh wash will do a nice job of picking out the lower details like her belly button, some of the creases in her abdomen and such. Putting on the glasses again so we can concentrate a little closer. And although it is already a wash, I'm still going to add water to it because it's always easier to start with a lighter wash than it is a heavy wash. And I'm actually picking out certain details. I'm not just slathering it on as you would a base coat. So and sometimes it goes in a little thick, and that's fine. You can soak it back out with the brush. You see that I'm going back to my little paper towel here to bring some of the wash out of the bristles, because I don't want it too thick. I just want to be able to nicely bring the color in there. Kind of something to keep track of while you're working on shading is to kind of think where the shadows will actually fall. There's an advanced technique called Zenithal Lighting in which you basically hold the miniature under a direct source of light and get an idea where the shadows and highlights fall, and use that as a highlighting technique. The Zenithal lighting is a little more complicated because you actually paint it in kind of a top-down. We'll get into that possibly later, but using the same concept of seeing where the lights and the shadows fall, sometimes it helps to kind of hold it under a light to see where things are happening. That's basically what we're using as kind of a guide for where the shadows and highlights are going to fall. So, and sometimes it's okay to let it pool, but you got to be careful that if it pools too much, you'll actually get rings of pigment color. And that's kind of what was happening around her belly button. So you got to be very careful about putting too much on. You kind of want to place the color there and not just leave a big glob of the wash. And this applies to paints as well, particularly if you're thinning them down to the consistency of a wash. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so that looks pretty good for our wash. At this point, we're going to do the highlighting of the flesh. And as we have in the past, we're going to use the same flesh color that we base coated it with, in this case, the Caucasian flesh. And as we did with our base coat, I am going to water it down some so that we don't have the same intensity. I am using just the straight flesh tone to kind of blend the edges, clean up some of the overwash that happened with the flesh wash. So this is just kind of an in-between step to kind of pick out the stuff that may have gotten covered up in our previous level. All right, so that looks pretty good for kind of evening out our skin tone with our base color. I'm going to now take our linen white and add a little bit of that so that we get our highlight. Well, it came out a little runny. Notice I'm leaving the Caucasian flesh that we used in our previous coat, and I've added the linen white to the palette a little bit of a distance away, and again I'm going to bring a little bit of the linen white into the Caucasian flesh to decide what kind of highlight I want to use. I don't want to put it directly into each other because then I don't have control over how much of each I have in there. So yeah, and the tricky thing about white paints is their pigment tends to be stronger than some of the other colors, so it doesn't take much of the linen white to really brighten up the Caucasian flesh, so got to be careful. And again, just hitting the uppermost portions of her, so kind of the top of her abdomen, really picking out the highlights of her hips, to the top of her thigh. Her knee kind of sticks out, so we're just going to hit the top of the knee. And to really differentiate the fingers, we're going to kind of hit just the edges of the fingers as well. And again, more so the edge of the finger towards the top. So going across the back of her hand here. And again, this is where these Winsor & Newtons are really helpful because they have the nice razor sharp tip to them. You don't have to start with the Winsor & Newtons, particularly at $13 a brush or whatever they are, but it helps to have a nice sable brush so that you have a nice tip to do the detail work as we're working on tiny, tiny things. Small jobs. So definitely getting the top of her arm, top of her finger, got a little sloppy there, so I'm going to do a quick little erase. And as we did with the shading, we just assume that the highlights are going to be where the light would hit her. So like the top of her thigh, I want to make sure that shows up. Her hips that are sticking out from her belt, I want those to be nicely highlighted. Just kind of touching the top edge of her belt. Every so often you'll see me kind of use my thumb to wipe some of the paint away. It's probably a sloppy technique, but it's kind of a quick way to blend. If you see something too sharp in there, just kind of quickly rubbing off the paint helps to mellow it out. And so that's what we're looking at. We've also noticed that we're getting some followers now on YouTube. So why don't you send your requests, comments, questions, if there's a technique you want to see, why don't you go ahead and send that to playthegamepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Small Jobs.
And here's Marty with Mwahahaha.
Welcome back to In Play. Today we're going to be looking at Mwahahaha, a game by White Wolf Games. It's a competitive mad scientist world domination game. And here on the table in front of you, I've got all the pieces that come in this box. So, you get your cards, you get your mad scientist devices, you get your mad scientists, you get a cheat sheet that goes over all the rules of the game, you get a rule book. You get tokens. These are representative of the resources that you accumulate during the game. And you've got these shiny green and purple dice. A really nice feature, I thought. All right, so of the decks that you have at your disposal, you have your Empire deck, which allows you to get more resources by funding or forming dummy corporations throughout the game. So, like here, we have Thruster. We are rocket science. And this gets you 2 energy for every turn. So if you want to claim energy to build up your stockpile, you can get 2 energy from your Empire card here. You have your raw materials cards, your energy, money, Eureka, and structure. These are the resources that you accumulate over the game to help fund your device. The ultimate goal is to take over the world by threatening them with your world-destroying device. Other cards in the game are your minions, and we have the Dirty Trick card. You get one every turn. This is a card that can change the rules of the game for that turn. You can play it at any point during that turn, and you can turn the tables on your opponents. In addition to the regular raw materials I've shown you, there is also a wild card. Wild card allows you to grab any single resource for a rating of 1. On top of that, and this comes in more in the trading phase, you can trade resources with other players. In doing so, if you want to screw over other players, if you have in your hand the Betrayal card, you can tell them that you have a resource and they'll trade for whatever resource they have for you instead of actually slipping them a resource. Aha, obviously you are giving them a betrayal card and you're screwing them over. Now remember, they will remember this betrayal for the rest of the game and they will return it in kind at some point if they don't just come in, raid your lair, and kill all your friends anyway. Which happens. You are a mad scientist. These are your mad scientist world-dominating devices. There's a solid stack of them. And they are used by each player to take over the world, or at least threaten the world with takeover. Places that you can take over as you develop your device over the game: city, state, country, and ultimately the world. Now, there are multiple devices fitting your style of play, fitting the layer that you end up with your mad scientist, the resources that you can get for yourself, and just kind of your imagination. Now, some of these are better than others in actual resources used, in gameplay, and in development imagination. Like when they made the game, they had some like propagate man-eating plants. Fun. There's another one that's just bomb. Kind of lame. Resource tokens. These resource tokens, which are cardboard in nature, represent the actual resources you've accumulated over the game, and you take them and you can put them in a stockpile in your location or on your device, or you can spend them out to purchase minions or an empire. When you threaten a city or threaten a state, if when you threaten and you lose, the combat that happens, which we'll get to, you get a humiliation token. And that lowers your ability later on in the game. And it makes you look like a fool. You can also get a humiliation token if you have a world-ending device and you go after a state. It just looks silly. You kind of look pathetic. Don't do it. There's also maniacal. Say a city has said, no, we will not bow down to your demands, and they defeat you. Instead of just taking the humiliation token, you can take a maniacal token, which says, you're not bowing to my demands? I push the button anyway. And you propagate your man-eating plants right onto Detroit, because, you know, Detroit needs it. You generally start out the game by picking your mad scientists. There are multiple, I will fan this out, it'll look very pretty, multiple mad scientists. On these cards, you have where you put your stockpile. You also have what your layer can convert from the resources. So not every layer can convert all of the resources. That's why you have to have Empire cards or you have to steal it from your enemy. You also have your illustration, your scientist's power, where you can put your maniacal or humiliation tokens as you accumulate them. And this big hole right here, this is where your device would snap in. Kind of a novel little thing. Being cut out of cardboard with any of the flashing that it has, they don't all fit perfectly well. And while you're laying it on a table, it's not a big problem. It's not also the easiest way of doing things. So basic game setup is this. Players pick their mad scientist. Then they're handed 3 doomsday devices. Reading through your layer of your scientist and the requirements for the device, you pick one of those 3 devices, the other 2 going back to the doomsday pile on the side. As you're going through the game, if you've decided that, yeah, you know, my device isn't working out quite like I thought, you can kind of mulligan and develop a new device. It will set you back a little bit, but you can always start with a new device. If people are just laughing at your bomb because you just weren't creative enough to come up with a new name for it. Other than that, the raw materials deck, depending on the amount of players you have, changes. If you have a game of 5 players, you use the full deck. That's 125 cards. For every player less than that to 2, you take out 25 cards. The trick is when the raw materials run out, they're gone. There's no reestablishing raw materials. So if you find yourself lagging behind in raw materials towards the end of the game and people are building their last doomsday device, it behooves you to try to steal as much as you can from the other players. Once these are gone, you're kind of SOL. So after you determine initiative, you also then deal out every turn a new dirty trick to players. Again, these dirty tricks can be played anytime during the course of the game. Unless the card itself specifically says otherwise. Now, 3 phases of the game are creation, rivalry, and domination. In the creation phase, you are getting your raw materials, you're turning in your cards that you have gotten on your turn. You can get up to 5 cards per turn, and you can turn those in according to your layer and your empire for resources that are refined by your layer or your empire. In this phase, you can also purchase more empire cards, purchase minion cards. You can start trading resources with other players. You can stockpile resources, or you can start developing your doomsday device. Each doomsday device has a source or amount of resources that are necessary for it to build, depending on the build you want. If you just want a city device, which is the lowest, you only have to spend a few resources. But if you get up to the world-shaking doomsday device, that's going to cost a lot more. You're probably going to have to build up your empire before that. You're probably going to have to go into your enemy's lairs and steal. So that's what you do in the creation phase. In the rivalry phase, you are now directly screwing with the other scientists that you're competing with. Now, to do that, you can do 2 things. You can attack their empires, which removes, resource refining places for them, or you can attack their lair. Now, when you attack their lair, you can go in and destroy or steal resources. Either way, one's going to be more beneficial towards you, but again, you can go in and take stuff for yourself, or you can just screw your opponent by destroying their resources. Again, resources being limited, it's up to you. Both empires and layers are defended by minions. Now, they have a natural defense themselves. Generally, it's 1 point. I think it's 2 for layers. Then you start adding on minions to defend, and you have to match numbers and die rolls for your minions to fight your attackers and your defenders. That's in the rivalry phase. And then the final phase, if you can afford to do it, is the domination phase. And that's when you take your doomsday device and you threaten, Spokane, or you threaten Haiti, or you just decide, I'm going to threaten the world. And this is where you roll the big dice. The world defends itself, and you attack it. And if they back down, you gain victory points, you get resources, and if it's the world, you win the game. If you're doing a small town, you cow them, and they give you what feeble resources they have. But sometimes they're going to be tougher, and they're going to say, no, we're just not going to back down. We don't care. We're New York. We don't fold. And then, if you were me, you'd go, well, screw you, and you'd blow them up. And you get a maniacal, but it's always a fun time. And it lets the other players know that you're not going to back down, and it lets the world know that you're coming, like Dr. Doom. So, that is the game in a nutshell. It's a fun time. I've had games that can drag on a while, depending on the players, thinking, whatnot. The creation phase is supposed to go in a simultaneous fashion. Everybody's figuring out everything at the same time. So that can either go very smoothly, or it can drag out as players are negotiating and just like, no, that's not good enough, or you betrayed me, I'm going to get you. But it is a fun game. I do have some problem with some of the components. I don't think the cards are very well put together necessarily. I think they did a very nice job of coming up with artwork for the game. But it didn't transfer over to all of the cards. The cards are actually pretty blasé. The card stock used for the scientists, very nice. But again, since it's cardboard on cardboard and you're spinning the dials in the middle, maybe something plastic or something a little bit different would have been nicer. So, that is the basics of Mwahahaha. It is a fun game. It'll take you probably 2 hours to play. It's 2 to 5 players. And I say if you're into the mad scientist, world domination, screwing over your friends kind of game, give it a try. It can be really funny and really fun. So, Mwahaha.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. We hope you had fun.
Make sure to drop us a line at playthegamepodcast@gmail.com.
Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter.
Hit up our website, playthegamepodcast.com.
Check out our YouTube channel and follow the blog on Board Game Geek.
Have a good month, folks. That's it.